Alright, so welcome back. In today's video, I have a sort of interesting item that I have bought. This is going to be a slightly different style of video, but I wanted to try doing something like this. So this is what I have bought. This is a Fleischmann Baldwin switcher. It's based loosely off a VO-660 and a VO-1000, which I bought for a total of $5. So I'm going to go over this engine and all the things that make it great and perfect for me, despite how unrealistic and outdated this model is. So before I go into anything majorly in detail, we'll talk a little bit more about this. So this, again, made by Fleischmann, based off of a mix of Baldwin switchers, and I looked into it. This model was made in West Germany between 1955 and 1965, making this about 65 or 70 years old. When I got it, it had a whole bunch of paint stains and everything here. It had remnants of these decals on the other side, but they were pretty faded, so when I cleaned this side off, somehow they came off. I was originally planning to repaint this engine since CNW never had these type of switchers, but since it cleaned up so well, I'm just going to leave it as is. It's a really interesting engine, and I quite like it. Another thing is some of these handrails were bent, so I bent them all back into place. And I installed some Cadies, which are at the right height. The trucks, if you can't tell, here, I'll show it better here. They like to move back and forth, which isn't that prototypical, but oh well. Which, this is quite the interesting engine. I do quite like it. It also, just of note, weighs about a pound. It's a really interesting model. So I will actually compare this to my Baldwin VO-1000, the Western Pacific one that I showed off in a video a couple of months ago. So I'll grab that, and we'll do an interesting comparison of the two. Alright, so I've got my Bowser Baldwin VO-1000 out to compare it to this mix of Baldwin switchers, which, just of note, this isn't an actual comparison to knock this model. It's just mostly to compare how they look and their size and how different modern day is compared to what's pretty much an antique model at this point. The first thing I will go over, which you might be able to see here, is just the sheer size difference. This model is actually HO scale. These are believed to be more of 00 scale, which apparently it's a common thing to convert these to HO American 00 scale, which is apparently a thing people do, I found out. So, as you can see, this one is substantially taller and wider than this engine, as well as, and this might be able to show it, it is quite a bit longer. I'd say it's about somewhere between 3/4 of an inch and half, or an entire inch longer than it, which is quite significant. But I will go on to the actual details now. And again, I'm basing this off the VO-1000. It's apparently a mix of a VO-660 and a VO-1000. So some of these things may be accurate for the VO-660. I looked a little bit at pictures of them, but I'm mostly comparing it off this. I'll start this comparison with the front of the locomotives. And as you can see, this one on the left is a good pilot, as well as just a nice looking grille and headlight. This one on the front, the actual grille itself seems really, really curved. This isn't a thing that I noticed on either the VO-1000 or VO-660 in pictures. And just because this truck, the coupler is mounted to the truck itself, it needs room to pivot, so the actual pilot looks a bit off. Which, just based on it, is okay. Again, the handrails are much bulkier, but it is an engine that's a lot larger. But the handrails do actually seem to be in the accurate locations, on the front at least, which is good. But yeah, again, this isn't an actual prototypical thing. It's just more so a comparison between modern and ancient. Hopefully with this angle that this is visible. But I'm going to just start with the side comparison first. So we'll go front to back on each of the engines. So first off, you've got this little box right here on the Baldwin VO-1000. And on this one, however, it's not as raised or elevated, and it's slightly curved. The handrail along the side also looks pretty accurate compared to the size and stuff, which is good. Also, on this engine, there's this little divot, has it here, as well as the vent, which is a good start. Then these doors are a little bit different. On this model, the first one is a double door. On this one, it's a single door. I think the doors on this one might be modeled off the VO-660. So I won't go too much into detail, but they're definitely different. I am, in fact, going to move this over now. I'm going to compare the cab area. I'll move this a little bit, but the walkway on this one is significantly taller than this, which, again, might be a thing on the VO-660. I don't remember it being that tall, but it could, in fact, be. The cab has also got this little arch here, where here it's just angled. Neither of them have handrails there, which I'm assuming is accurate, aside from right here, which then again, it might be molded onto there, but it's quite hard to see just because it's all painted. Move these forward a little bit. The windows shape themselves on this one looks quite fine. And yeah, it does look good. I'm not the biggest fan of how they molded on the sunshades for this one, because they do in fact exist. So, the side of it, it's okay. I'll double check the other side, make sure there's no actual inconsistencies, and point out any if there are. The other side of the engine is a little bit different, in fact, so I want to just share a few of the things. These top vents here vary from the other model, which it did on the other side as well, I didn't notice. But the other thing to note is these grab irons there are actually fairly accurate compared to the VO-1000, which is quite interesting. So yeah, I don't have much more to say about this side, but I just want to go over, do a quick little comparison of the roofs. This one, just because I don't care so incredibly much about it, since it was $5 and doesn't have much detail parts, I'm fine leaving it on its side. This one I will just pick up and hold. So one of the more major differences is these vents here. This one looks really nice and goes across the whole hood, and this one's just in the center. Another little thing, again, might be different for the VO-660, I'm not 100% sure. These on here are much more square and crisp, and on this one they're rounded and actually separated more. The smokestack and horn are also in a different location, but I didn't look at pictures closely, so I'll give it that, just being closer to the 660 based on that little detail. The other thing is the light housings are slightly different, but that's not too much to knock it for. So now, just for the last little comparison bit, I'll move on to the back. From the back, it doesn't look too bad at all. The roofs are pretty much the same curvature, the windows are in the same positions and about the same size. It's about the same gap in detail parts. Again, the pilot issue, there's not much to note back here. It's a quite fine model for what it was, and this one on the left is a great model for what it is in today's market. So now, I'll talk a little bit more about the performance and stuff of just the Fleischmann engine. You'll see all the clips after this, but just based off how this engine ran for the hour I was filming for before this clip that I'm filming now, the engine just got slightly warm, which I don't know why I'm touching it, you can't feel it, but you just have to trust me, it got a little bit warm. It runs really quietly as well. I haven't opened it up, given it any oil, anything like that. This is just exactly how I got it. It was just someone who didn't want the engine anymore, so I decided to take it on and care for it. It's only a rear-wheel drive for the truck. I believe, I might be wrong, yeah. These wheels here are geared, but they aren't actually powered, which is a little bit weird to me. It is, in fact, two-rail DC. And as you'll see, I'll probably overlay it here, but this engine is capable of pulling 10 cars easily, 12 cars is pushing it, and after that, you can't really do much more. But for a switcher on my layout, it's not going to be pulling that many. I plan to actually redo my big layout in the coming future, and I do want to have a lot of switching industries that'll house like 1 or 2 cars, so I'll have maybe 4 or 5 of these little switching points, which for this engine, it'll work perfectly. That's why I wanted this. I would like to just, as one more thing, add in a few little bits I didn't specify about this engine. It has a slightly bent frame, as you can sort of see. It's angled down a little bit. It's been, by the previous owner, glued to sort of help the frame stay up. It isn't the greatest, but it works. These couplers also, just based on their position, don't allow the trucks to move up and down all that much. And with my layout, that isn't something that's really a concern. In the future, I could modify it slightly, shave down the tops a little bit, but for now, I'm going to leave it. It works perfectly fine for me. I think that's just about all I had to add, so let's move on. So now I guess it's time for me to go back to the past and show you how well this engine ran, and we'll get a little bit of a running session in with it. Alright, so I've got the switcher set up on my layout. This, I will admit, is not my first time running this thing. But here's how it runs. It's quite a good engine. I have not opened this up either, as I said earlier. It's a bit louder in reverse, but it runs quite smoothly. There's even a little bit of a creep out of it. Maybe the creep isn't that great on it, but I mean, for switching, going this slow will be ample enough, and it does that pretty well. So how about we get this hooked up to a train and get a running session of it in. Alright, I've got it hooked up to a pretty nice train of Atherton and Walther's rolling stock, so let's get this train on the move. Is this engine an accurate engine? No. Is it modern? No. Is it too oversized? Yes. Does it work well for what I need it to? Also, yes. Again, this is not a perfect engine by any stretch of the imagination, but for what I wanted, the price point, and how it performs, I think it'll do me perfectly fine to use on my layout for quite some time. So, thanks for watching. I'm not sure if you'll see this engine at all on the channel anymore, because I'll just be using it for operation. Doesn't seem to have much going wrong with it. So hopefully it stays that way. Maybe it'll have a running session on the channel in the future. But for now, it'll be off the channel, and I'll just be using it as a nice engine.